Working? Good evening. We'll call the Rent Stabilization Commission meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Secretary, could we have a roll call?
Commissioner Maggio,
Present.
Commissioner Gregoire,
Here.
Commissioner Topshin,
Here.
Commissioner Charity,
Here.
Commissioner Buckles,
Present.
Vice Chair Bergstein,
Here.
Chair Kerpes.
Here. All right. Could I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Wasn't there a correction that was sent to us via email? Do you have the correction?
The one in front of you is the corrected one. That's the one you're voting on.
Then I move approval.
Which one in front of me?
We're talking about the agenda. Is it right?
I
I don't have a
We don't have one.
You don't have one?
A corrected?
in my other folder. No.
It's not in your packet?
No.
Okay. All right, I'll get you the corrected one then. Hold on.
Rob?
change, do we?
I don't remember. No, just move forward. We'll come back to that.
Can't really move forward without an agenda.
Approve the minutes.
I'll assume that the next item was to approve the minutes.
Move to approve as submitted.
Second.
Second? You got a second?
Right, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so assuming everyone has had a chance to read the minutes, or review the minutes, do we have, or any changes? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Minutes approved. We'll go back to approving tonight's agenda with that one change, moving the liaison appointments to unfinished business. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
And second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we have an agenda. We will move to public comments. Do we have any public comments for this first session?
No.
Okay. We will move right into the director manager's report then.
Good evening. Just wanted to let you know that we will be hearing a report from Code Compliance regarding a proposed change to the ordinance regarding home sharing. On the 30th, there's going to be an annual Congress of Commissions and Advisory Boards at the West Hollywood Library and Council Chambers, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. On December 14th, there's going to be a special study session on the systematic code enforcement program, and the February 8th meeting has been canceled due to quorum. Also, you'll find in your folders a flyer from the Disability Advisory Boards. They're celebrating Disability Awareness Month. On Wednesday, October 25th, they are going to have an award ceremony. It's going to be a reception at 5 p.m. and awards at 6 p.m. here at the City Council Chambers. And on Tuesday, October 17th, there's going to be a health and wellness event from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Plummer Park. That's it.
So the 26th, we're just keeping open that date if a hearing comes up, or no?
I'm sure, I haven't received any direction otherwise.
You haven't what?
I haven't received any direction otherwise.
So, right now, we don't have anything on the agenda, but that, we don't know whether that'll change or not, right? Either way,
That's correct.
yeah. So maybe for that one, we wait and see when Peter comes back.
And for the 9th, and, okay.
Well, we're still a ways out for the 9th, so that they can potentially add a
hearing.
hearing or presentation.
I had
Any
a-
other questions?
I had a brief question for staff. I had a phone call from a resident who said that she was unable to find the posted agenda. How far in advance of our meetings is the agenda posted online? And how far, I know there are hard copies that go up like at City Hall, maybe at the Sheriff's Station. What is the timeline for the posting of the agenda?
It's at least 72 hours prior to the meeting. It is posted online and in hard copy. And this last one was actually posted Thursday.
Okay, so both the hard copy and the online may go up the same day, but always at least 72 hours in advance?
Correct.
Thank you for clarifying.
Any other questions for staff?
Just want to confirm, the attendance of the Congress is not mandatory, is it correct? I believe it is not mandatory. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we will move into new or any commissioner comments? Seeing none, then we will move right on into new business. This is the amendment to the Rent Stabilization Ordinance. The Rent Stabilization Commission will receive information on a proposed amendment to Section 17.52010, grounds for termination of the Rent Stabilization Ordinance, protecting tenants from eviction for a first violation of the city's proposed home sharing ordinance. I believe we have Mr. Mick.
That's correct. My name is Daniel Mick. I'm the Code Compliance Supervisor with the city. The item before you today is a proposed amendment to the Rent Stabilization Ordinance. in order to protect tenants from eviction for violations or first violations of the city's proposed home sharing ordinance. In October of 2015, City Council reaffirmed a prohibition on what's called short-term rentals. Short-term rentals, broadly defined, is the renting of a unit or a part of a dwelling unit to anybody for less than a period of 31 days. To go a little deeper, there's actually 3 real categories that fall under short-term rentals. You have the vacation rentals, which commonly called vacation rentals, which is nobody actually lives there on a day-to-day basis. It's just a unit that's put on sites like Airbnb or VRBO, and it's solely used for these short-term rental purposes. You also have the hosted home sharing, where it's traditionally somebody's just renting a spare room or a part of a room like a couch, while that primary tenant who lives there permanently is staying in the unit during the guest stay. Then there's also the unhosted home sharing, which is similar, where the host will rent out their primary residence, their unit, their house, whatever it might be, but they rent the entire unit during periods where they're not there during the guest stay. So if somebody goes out to Palm Springs for a weekend, my unit's available, I will charge you X number of dollars, so be it. In July of 2017 of this year, Code Compliance brought a report back to City Council, basically giving a broad overview of the short-term rental market in West Hollywood. At that time, we found there's a little over 1,000 short-term rental ads out there for our 1.9 square miles, which is quite dense. There's quite a lot of short-term rental activity going on in our city. However, during that staff report, we provided information regarding all the complaints, all of the cases, all the citations we've ever received or filed for short-term rental activity. And at no point in time has staff ever received a complaint regarding hosted home sharing. Again, that's just renting a spare room or a couch, but the host is living there during the guest stay. We'd never once received a complaint. So council gave us the direction to return with an item that allows for hosted home sharing. So that's the item that we're going to hopefully move forward with on November 6th. But to do that, we had to make changes to 3 different codes. We have the business license code, which is where the general overall operating conditions will be found. I believe you have the proposed ordinance is in the packet that you received. That was heard by the Business License Commission October 3rd. So they've heard that. The zoning code will be amended, and that was heard in front of the Planning Commission last Thursday. And then we're also going to be amending the rent stabilization ordinance, which we're hearing tonight. Don't know how many questions I need or how much information I need to give you on this, but I can provide you some basic information regarding the level of hosted home sharing that's taking place in our city, and this was as of March of this year. At that time, we only had 26 listings in the city for shared rooms, which is, like I said, it's generally like renting out a couch. It was only being rented for an average of 32 nights a year at an average nightly rate of $62. And the average revenue per year for shared listings was just under $2,000 for the year. For private room rentals, there was about a little over 200 listings with an average of 73 nights per year for a rate of, on average, $91 per night. And the average revenue per year was a little over $6,000. It's not a big market in our city. It's just not. Most people that want to come to our city want to rent out either a hotel room, which is what they're meant for, or they want a full unit listing. They don't want to sit on somebody's couch that they don't know while they're there. So it's a pretty limited issue that we have as far as hosted home sharing in our city. So we do recommend moving forward with this, But we also wanted to take into concern that, there are issues that come up with allowing this. There are landlord rights that we want to protect. The landlord does have the right to, say no. The tenant should not be allowed to engage in this activity without the express permission of the landlord or the HOA. If it's against the CC&Rs, it shouldn't be allowed. We're comfortable with that. But the tenant also needs protection for engaging in home sharing, either unknowingly, they didn't realize that they didn't have they were doing it without the proper approvals or permissions. So we don't want to incentivize landlords from evicting long-term tenants or short-term tenants from our city in order to raise the rents especially in a rent-stabilized unit. So what we proposed, let me get there, is we're going to treat it similarly to how illegal business, or I'm sorry, home occupations are treated in the rent stabilization ordinance. Right now, you're allowed to engage in home occupations, and you cannot be evicted as long as you have all the requisite permits and approvals from your landlord. Same thing here. You cannot be evicted if it's your first violation and you correct it immediately within 30 days of being notified by your landlord that, hey, this is not okay. It will be a by right type of activity. Again, as long as you obtain the proper permissions and approvals. And part of the permission will have to come from the landlord or the HOA. The approvals will have to come from City Hall in the form of a business license. The host will have to pay the proper taxes, the TOTs, which is the same rate as what hotels have to pay. But I think we've crafted this in a way that protects the rights of both the tenants and the landlords. And I don't know how much more I can add to that. With this, I'll open it up to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Why don't we open it up for a couple questions, and if we could stay just simply on questions until we hear public comments, but some of our questions I think might trigger some answers for you to give that might also be relevant to some of the things the audience might have to comment on. So does anyone have any questions to start out with?
Yeah, I had a quick one. I saw in the introductory materials and what you said about the first violation provision of this, but I was reading the code pretty, I thought, detailed, and I didn't see exactly where in the code it talked about first violation versus subsequent violations. Can you point that out to us? Is it in there?
It's the way it was drafted in the chapter 17, 52010, number 5B. There's the it says you can't, I'm trying to think of exactly how to phrase this.
Because I guess my issue was, I guess as I was reading it, it just felt like serial violations can be corrected with this provision that says ceasing all home sharing activity. And I just, had a thought where if someone was renting for only like 3 days and then the landlord complains and then, well, you cease the home sharing activity because it's such a short term, and then they do it again and then you cease it and correct. I just was wondering, like, is it a continuing cycle of...
No, it's once you have your first violation, that's it. And the violation will be triggered once the city has issued a formal warning or a formal citation. It doesn't matter if it's 2 years down the road that you have your second one, you've been put on notice that this is not allowed. If you continue it, you've now taken your future and the possibility of you living in where you live into your own hands.
And I was just a little concerned maybe about that being spelled out in it a little more explicitly, because, being a lawyer, I would
We try to
challenge
keep
it.
this as just a question part, and then we can
Yeah,
add that
you
stuff
got it.
in
Sure,
the
no
comments.
problem.
Thank you. I have a question. Can you kind of give us just under the status quo, currently all of this is illegal. Can you tell us about enforcement, how enforcement operates currently?
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you brought this up because I kind of missed the main part of all of this. Currently, like as you said, all short-term rentals are illegal, and we go through, click on Airbnb ads if they're sent to us, or we just start scrolling through Airbnb or looking at other sites that provide us some of this data, and we start trying to identify, okay, this listing is for this address, which is very difficult to establish, or it's this person conducting it. Again, it's very difficult because they, hosts that don't want to be found have found ways to cover their tracks. It's very difficult. So we can spend a couple hours just on one particular advertisement trying to find out who that is. Oftentimes, we still won't find out who it is, but if you take that over, you know, the 1,000 ads or 1,000 plus ads that we have in our city, that's a significant amount of work with fairly low success rates because it's just, again, very difficult to find this information. So one of the drivers for us proposing to allow for hosted home sharing was we wanted to try to find a way to automate a lot of this process. There's a company out there called Host Compliance, which is, this is all they do. They are the standard and the biggest, best company out there for identifying all the listings out there for a particular jurisdiction, trying to identify as close as possible to the specific address of where it's taking place, trying to identify, you know, who's actually conducting this, because oftentimes hosts will use their profile picture from Facebook as their profile picture from on Airbnb. Well, they have their methods to, you know, compare photos and say, oh, well, we have a match between this photo and this photo, and they can kind of draw that line, which we know will stand up in court. I mean, we'll still verify all this stuff. But Host Compliance has made it very clear that they will not work with any city that has a complete ban and a complete prohibition on short-term rentals. There's just the threat of lawsuits from not only Airbnb, but from any short-term rental platform is too great for them to risk their business model. So that was the driver for us trying to find a way to really allow our residents to take part in the shared economy without, you know, significantly disrupting the community at large. And that's really what we're trying to do, is protect the community, but realizing that short-term renting and the shared economy is not going away. It's going to continue happening, and we need to find a way to try to embrace it.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Chair Kupis, I want to ask, the number of days that the tenant can use for this program, there would be limit is up to 31 days, 30 days. That didn't change, right? The limit on the number of days.
Are you, just for clarification, are you asking how many days a host can rent their unit?
Yeah.
Is that on a per year basis?
Yeah.
In our July 17th council meeting, the city council did direct us or gave us the 90-day per year cap.
Oh, okay, so I misunderstood that.
So other commissions have recommended lifting that cap, you're raising it some. Some commissioners have expressed no cap. Other commissioners have said, let's say 180 days. Other commissioners have said, you know what, staff is the subject matter expert, so if staff says 90 days, then we'll stick with 90 days. These will all be vetted by the council when we come back to them. We'll provide a full, complete story as to what the commissioners have been recommending.
I see. All right, thank you.
I have probably 4 questions. So the first one is regarding, I guess, B, subsection B, the 30 days after the landlord provides notice. Does that mean that the tenant can continue to home share for 29 days after they receive the notice?
Technically, I guess they probably could. I'd like to see if we had a staff attorney here. They could probably answer that a little bit better than I can. But I don't see that actually happening, to be perfectly honest, because again, the maximum number of days that are done per year, the average number of days, really doesn't support that would happen, because it's not likely that any unit is engaging in hosted home sharing for 29 consecutive days. It's unlikely, but to be perfectly honest, it's probably theoretically possible.
Okay. Can you walk us through a little bit more of the process for registration and what that entails, owing to the city? And then also the process of the city issuing a tenant a citation or notice of violation?
Yes, as far as registration, we're still trying to figure all of that out. We don't have the process in place yet. We just finalized our contract with Host Compliance, who will be doing the online certificate or the permitting just a couple weeks ago. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what the process is. We want it to be an online process. We want it to be as quick and easy as possible. The reason for that is we looked at other cities. San Francisco was a shining example of what not to do in their initial attempt at this. They made it too difficult. You have to go into the office, you have to make an appointment with this desk, fill out your paperwork, make an appointment with this desk, and just there was step after step after step. And they found that people weren't enrolling in the program or participating in the program because it was just too onerous. So we really want to make this an online, streamlined process where people will provide the requisite information, your name, your address, your property owner's information or the landlord's information, whatever it might be. We're going to make sure that they self-certify that they do in fact have the permission of the landlord and HOA. And that's kind of key here, is that we want them to self-certify. But we're going to make it explicitly clear that if you're doing this, if you lie on this form, it's under penalty of perjury, and if we find out that you're lying, we will yank your business license immediately. There will be, an appeals process in City Hall at the director level, but we want to make this a very simple process to engage and encourage people to come in from out of the dark. I mean, we want to be part of the process. Walk us through this process, or walk with us through through this ordeal. So that's kind of how it's going to be. I hope that answers that first part of the question. And how do we go about? The second was for how do we go about issuing warnings and citations?
Just what kind of penalty does that come with?
A warning doesn't come with any penalty, of course, except for here. Once you get a warning, now that clock starts on that 30 days. So if you don't cease the activity in 30 days, now you're opening yourself up to a possible eviction. But with citations, if you're talking about the monetary portion of it, it depends on what the violation's for. Currently, since it's not allowed at all, if you receive a citation, the citation is based on, I think for the first citation, it's 400% of the nightly rate, the advertised nightly rate, multiplied by the minimum number of nights that you show on your website.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
Say that last sentence again, please.
It's, for the first citation, it's 400% of the nightly rate multiplied by the minimum number of nights that you list on the website. So if you want to try to, say a 2-week minimum, and you're charging $50 a night, well, 50 times 400% times 12, that's the first citation. That went into effect in July of this year. The people that we've cited are not happy with the city. And for good reason. Just the other day, we issued a citation for $22,000. It's gonna hurt. We want it to hurt because you're doing something that's fundamentally unlawful. We don't want to encourage people to act in an inappropriate manner, but we do want to make sure that we're allowing residents to participate in this program under real strict conditions. Does that answer your question as much as possible? And the fines go up from there. For a second violation, it's 600%. Third violation is 800%.
Any statistics on how many citations until now code enforcement has issued? Whether tenant or landlord, the total number of citations. I just wanted to see the picture.
Sure. I just did a public records request yesterday for this, so I have pretty close to specific information. I believe we're up to 47 citations, but we've only recently been getting much better information, better access to information. So it's kind of picked up quite a bit. And I think our total citations, dollar amounts, we're looking $40-some-odd thousand, plus the late fees that have accumulated. So I think we're collecting right around $60,000 right now.
I wanted to ask you a question on home businesses. Home occupation is allowed under the zoning ordinance. Do we have a list of businesses that cannot be done at home?
I don't have that list, but it's not super specific. There are some types of businesses or home occupations that are allowed that need no planning permits whatsoever. And there are others that I believe require, entail client visits and visits from the outside, or that have a little bit more disturbance to the surrounding community that require an administrative permit.
They would need permits. How do you report people, individuals that are paying less municipal taxes on their occupation, but they're making much more money, but they're taking the lower number? Should they be reported? And if they are, how can that be done? Who would you do that to?
As it relates to the home sharing, or I'm not sure if he's
Also.
ready to answer the
Well,
question without all of his.
If you're breaking the law, how do you report that?
Call me.
Call you.
I mean, that's a real simple answer. And
Oh, code enforcement, correct?
Right, of course. But contact us. We may not be the division that actually follows through with that, but we'll make sure that that concern gets relayed to the appropriate department. Because part of your question seemed to be centered around like underreporting taxes or underreporting income. Something like that, I would have to refer to finance, because that's what they do. I don't want to answer for them, so I'm sure they have their own processes.
Has to be consequences, if someone is lying or cheating. So there has to be some sort of process.
Absolutely. But if we're trying to bring this back into how this is going to play out with the home sharing, we're still working on some of these processes. All home sharing participants must submit a transient occupant, a TOT registration certificate, basically meaning they're going to promise to pay their TOTs, which is higher than what the basic business tax is. We're discussing the possibility of allowing Airbnb to collect the TOTs directly from the hosts, and then they submit it all to us. We're still trying to figure out some of those intricacies. We're not sure. But then host compliance, as part of the permitting system, will also have a tax collection interface as well that allows, well, first of all, we'll notify hosts on a monthly basis, hey, your taxes are due, please click on this link to pay your taxes. They'll go through and, submit the requisite information, because it probably won't be that much. It'll be, how many times you host this month, what was your total income? Okay, times 12.5% or whatever the TOT number is, that's your total. Pay here. You just submit a credit card and it pays pretty quickly, and they just submit the information to us. As far as catching them if they're underreporting, that's always going to be a tough thing to deal with, but we do have TOT auditing processes in place. Just like if a hotel tries to underreport their income, finance does have the means to audit that. And we are going to require, or we're looking to require, hosts to keep records the same way that hotels do. You've got to keep a record for 3 years. And, we can always subpoena Airbnb for some of this information if we have, real suspicions that something, untoward's taking place. And they will provide us the information.
And I'm gonna cut you off right there, because we're kind of getting outside of what the comments for this evening will be, but I appreciate the report on that. And are there any other questions?
Last question, Chair Corpus, if I may ask. How many code compliance officers right now are handling these complaints And you mentioned there are over 1,000 web, not the web pages, but the advertisements, right? And only 47 citations have been issued so far. So how many code enforcement officers you have on field?
Well, I have a total of 8 officers, I think, that are field officers, but I only have one of them actually working with short-term rentals.
Only one person that would
one
handle the possible violations of the
That's
code.
correct. And they're trying to do that in between working on the cases, the regular code cases as well.
I see, thank you.
All right, if there are no other questions, we'll move to public comment.
Ask Laura, there's an additional slip next to Deanna.
Oh, we've got several she can bring. Yeah. We'll start with Kevin Brunke, followed by Lauren Lewis, and you'll have 3 minutes. If you could begin with stating your name and city of residence, and we'll start your time. Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Kevin Brunke. I'm a community organizer for Airbnb in Los Angeles. On behalf of Airbnb, I'd like to commend city leaders for addressing this important issue and joining the hundreds of jurisdictions around the country who have recognized the economic benefits that home sharing provides for residents, businesses, and local governments. Tonight, you will hear from members of our host community who rely on home sharing to cover the cost of everything from their mortgage and rent to medical bills and groceries. The typical host in West Hollywood earns a little more than $9,000 a year sharing their home, and the vast majority share the home in which they live. In addition to helping families make ends meet, home sharing brings new visitors to West Hollywood, which in turn means more customers for local small businesses and restaurants. Over the last 12 months, our host community in West Hollywood welcomed nearly 55,000 guests to the city, and more than 90% of hosts recommend small businesses to their guests. At a time when brick-and-mortar stores in the community are struggling to keep up with competition from online retailers, home sharing is bringing customers and foot traffic to neighborhood businesses. To capitalize on these economic benefits, we ask that you reconsider the arbitrary 90-day cap on hosted stays. The vast majority of our hosts are responsible neighbors who share their primary home to earn a little extra money. Restricting the number of days they can rent out their home does little to address nuisance or quality of life issues. It only deprives these hosts of the income they rely on to make ends meet and robs the city of valuable economic activity generated from tourism to the greater LA area. We know from working with other cities around the world that the most successful legislation is both reasonable and fair. Although we are not the only home sharing platform operating in West Hollywood, we are the only one actively engaged in working with city leaders to create sensible regulations that address key community concerns and promote the economic benefits of home sharing. We look forward to working with you and city leaders on this issue. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak here tonight.
Thank you. Lauren Lewis, followed by Donald Emblad.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Lewis, and I have lived in West Hollywood on and off since the age of 12. I had a long marriage, during which time I raised 2 children and did tons of volunteer and fundraising work, which I continue to do, and I modeled, but at the age of 65, I'm hardly in demand. Automation and ageism has pretty much eliminated me from the job market. I don't know if you've heard the statistic that at one point General Motors made $6 billion a year with 600,000 employees, and now Facebook has the same valuation with 6,000 employees. Jobs are disappearing. I couldn't even get hired at Target, and I'm a summa cum laude from UCLA. Per my divorce decree, I was to receive alimony for life. My ex has been unable to give me a cent for over 5 years now. It's been very tough for many of us. And then came Airbnb. I have an extra room and bath in my condo and an additional parking space, though 90% of my guests don't require it. Living alone, I'm quite cautious, so screen potential guests carefully on top of the verification process that Airbnb does, and I have met the most wonderful people from all over the world, many of whom will be lifelong friends. Learning and sharing about different cultures, and especially connecting, in my humble opinion, is an important step in maintaining peace. I really don't like living alone for many reasons, but if I took a roommate, I'd have no place for my son who lives in New York and visits a few times a year. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, and Airbnb has been a godsend. Please recognize how people like myself could barely make ends meet without it, and I respectfully ask that you do not put a cap and limit the number of nights I can do this. I had one girl from China who said she wouldn't do hotels, and her only other option would be staying with friends. The problem being they feel obligated to entertain her, or she them, when sometimes she would just like to relax in her room. She said she wouldn't travel if it weren't for Airbnb, and she knows many people like this, and it brings money into the local economy, so it's a win-win situation. How many things in this world can we say that about? This would really help me age in place, and I sincerely thank you for your time.
Thank you. Donald Elmblad, followed by Brad Kiesler.
Hi, good evening, Donald Elmblad, 37-year resident of West Hollywood and before. As many of you know, I have a 4-unit property. I live in one and rent 3 units. 2 of my units are furnished. My silverware, my dishes, my linens, and I do that because in the 35 years I was a set decorator, I used to travel all over the country doing movies and television in South Africa, England, Canada, and I'd stay a day or 2 in a hotel, and then they would put me in a furnished apartment. And I loved it. I'm trying to give that back by having 2 of my 3 units furnished. But what I'm concerned about is in this information, there's no referral to the lease that the tenant signs. I have leases on my 3 units, no Airbnb, no subleasing, no pets, and no smoking. And any tenant who is allowed to do subleasing or Airbnb should have to follow that lease of no smoking and no pets. The last thing I'd want to do is see somebody move in with, 2 dogs, or smoking cigars where the tenant is not allowed. And the tenant shouldn't be allowed to have sublease to somebody who does that. So I think you need to refer to the lease in your paperwork here before it is approved. Furnished is a big deal. In one unit, I've got over $6,000 worth of art. In the other unit, it's about $7,000 worth of art that I've collected as a set decorator. The last thing I want to do is have a tenant be able to rent it out, and then he comes back and, oh, God, they took it. And then I have no control because I don't even know who they are. Also, of my 3 units, 2 of the units, the furnished units, have no parking. And so that tenant would have to then get guest passes for anybody who shares or stays or whatever. It shouldn't be up to me. I did have an incident with one tenant who lives in a furnished unit. He was going to be gone for 3 days. He told me, oh, my cousin's going to stay here. I said, well, I don't know your cousin. Does he smoke? Does he have pets? No. Well, 4 guys showed up, and in 2 cars, he only had 1 guest permit for them, and the other car, they parked in my driveway. I had to have them move it 4 times so I could back out, and 1 or 2 of them smoked. And he promised he would never do that again. It was a nightmare for me because I look down the driveway and I see all these people going in, and it just isn't right that they should be allowed to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Brad Kiesler, followed by Lenny DeNaro.
Hi, I'm Brad Kiesler. I'm a 20-plus year resident of West Hollywood. I have a 2-bedroom house, and I rent out this. I've been using the spare bedroom as an Airbnb rental. I've had so many great experiences over the years, and I recommend places to my guests all the time, local places for them to spend their money. So, I'm just thinking on September 1st, these are the reasons, some of the reasons that I do this. On September 1st, I fell during the middle of the night, and I woke up unconscious on the floor with abrasions on my face and a cut on my eye here. And at the time, I did not have an Airbnb guest. I live alone, so I was wondering, I hope if this is limited to 90 days, I hope that's one of the days that so I think there should be no cap for people like me who are the average Airbnb host. You mostly are hearing. Have you heard all the negative things? The negative effects on neighborhood and everything. Well, the last thing a host like me wants to do is disturb the neighbors or create waves. We want to stay legal, and I think permits and registration that should solve a lot of the problems. But I know it's a complicated issue. Now, I've been asked by other commissioners at other hearings, why don't I just get a permanent roommate? Well, for somebody at my age, you don't just go out and find a roommate, put an ad in like I did in my younger days, and I had a couple of bad ones. I learned over the years how to pick better people. But I like the flexibility of that I get with Airbnb, because I can rent when I want to and not when I want to. Like I had my niece visited me for like 10 days this last summer, and it was nice to have the spare bedroom. And also I have a long-term lover, boyfriend. We've been together a long time, but we've never lived together. And I'm thinking he has diabetes, and someday he may have I hope it's not coming up, but it could come up that he would have to move into the spare bedroom. Or myself, I might want to have a live-in caretaker someday, so that's why I don't want a permanent roommate. If I would like to have a permanent roommate too, if I found the right person, a real good friend that knew a long time, the reasons. It's almost like getting married, you have to So I had sent an email to many of the city council members just yesterday about a website called evolvevacationrental.com, and they look at all the major cities all over the world and how those cities deal with Airbnb.
Great. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, your time's expired. All right.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Lenny DeNaro, followed by Alan Hardin.
Hello, I'm Lenny DeNaro. I've been a longtime resident of West Hollywood since about 2009. This is very intimidating. I didn't realize that I was in violation of codes prior to it. I started hosting a few months ago, and I think it's Airbnb is a phenomenal service. I came to another hearing before, and the point that I wanted to set across was that Airbnb is a type of business, it's a service that's not going to go anywhere, that the company is going to be here to stay. So if we go ahead and put forth as a city a very restrictive set of conditions, they'll still operate outside of West Hollywood or outside of the bounds of probably the people here that are looking to do everything correctly. I think that most of the information, as in like 90% of the information that's in here is great. I think it's a very good idea to have a set of checks and balances between what people are going to be, how they're going to share their home out. But if we limit it and we have a limited number of days, we have a small cap of 30 or 90. I've heard a couple different timelines set forth. It's going to set up a situation where hosts may come on board and host some people and then go away. I have it now where I host a space and I manage it pretty well, but I have it all set up to receive people. If I keep switching things around, I wouldn't be able to afford to do it in small blocks, and it wouldn't be as nice as it is now. That's really it. I just want to say I'm supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan Hardin, followed by John Kettle.
Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity just to say a few words. I've been following this debate for some time, and I really wanted to just ask some questions and perhaps give a couple comments, if I may. I'm really searching when I read the ordinance and when I listen to the questions on exactly what evil we're looking to solve. We heard earlier that there have been no complaints regarding home sharing. Now, I'm interested in both the home sharing aspect of this as well as renting out individual units. I own several units in West Hollywood, both houses and condos and wish to, within HOA provisions, which I accept when I buy that unit, wish to be able to rent them out in whatever way I wish to do so. I see them as a income, a retirement income that I live off, and I am pretty concerned about the creeping regulations towards the sharing community, and I'm not sure what these regulations are serving, what purpose they're serving. There was a question earlier about tote and how we manage and how it should be managed with regard to collection of that tax. Well, there are many rules around tax and tax avoidance. Whether it's federal or state tax rules, there are many ways to ensure that if people are understating their income, to go after them. I also assume that tote, if that's going to be a new tax against those landlords and homeowners and home sharing, will be able to be offset against state and federal tax. If not, that becomes incredibly onerous. I don't know if the commissioners have considered or spoke to the IRS about exactly how that's going to be managed, but that's an important element to the net income that people will receive. Equally, I have no problem with being licensed, and therefore, if you're going to collect tote, you'll easily be able to follow the activities. I have no problem with that, but I do have a problem about cost. How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take to register? Who is going to make the judgments on the value of those properties? And I'm actually concerned that that hasn't yet been considered and that there's a process for it. I accept fully, and I enjoyed the comments about making it simple and streamlined. But I am worried about the cost of that and whether that's a business offsettable expense. And I think it obviously should be. I think the 90-day limit and limiting people on their opportunity to generate income to support their lifestyles in whatever manner they wish, I don't understand the purpose of that. If we have an individual unit, and as long as we do it on 31-day lots, we could rent it for 365 days or 360, however it balances out for the year. So why limit another activity? And I think that, if I may be so bold as to say it's an arbitrary limit, I certainly think it is. Equally, definition of primary residence. There are many definitions of that in the tax code. Why not just go with those? And I don't know if 270 is that.
All right. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
You're welcome. Thank you.
John Keitel, followed by Andy Derry.
Yeah, John Keitel. I've been
sorry.
a resident of West Hollywood since 1994, and a business owner before that. And I just want to say, while I agree with the prior gentleman's comments, please don't conflate me with him and his situation. I'm a renter in a rent-controlled unit, and if this goes through, I will become a criminal. And I don't intend to become a criminal because I am an off-site host, which means I'm not there to supervise my guests, and frankly, I haven't needed to supervise my guests. There have been no problems whatsoever in my experience of renting out to an Airbnb clientele. And I could get homespun, and I could tell you about how wonderful it's been and the tremendous people I've met from around the world who are artists and seekers and pilgrims coming to see either, the Hollywood Strip or whatever, and how I've shared the city with them, and the tremendous money they spend here that I certainly don't when I'm here, or that, how it provides me the ability to pursue my craft of documentary filmmakers, especially in a post-2008 economy when it's very difficult to make ends meet, and things like Airbnb are a godsend, okay? What I'm gonna ask you, though, is why do you want to get in between me and my landlord? I have a lease, and there is nothing in my lease from 1990-something that indicates that I can't do this as stated. And you now want me to get my landlord's approval? It seems to fly in the face of the inspiration of what the city was founded on. It's just crazy. It's draconian. I'm sorry. And I think this whole thing should be shelved, and I think that we should take a lead from Lindsay Horvath, who recognized that the majority of people that live in this city who don't participate in this process are under the age of 43. And this is not, I think, their city. And I think that we need to revisit this entirely with a whole new, this doesn't recognize any of what Airbnb has to offer the community or the gig economy in general. So I hope that you guys look at this with a circumspect eye.
Thank you. The next speaker is Andy Derry, followed by Andrea D.
Good evening, Commissioners. My opinion that indeed the regulation is very, very important. But on the other hand, we have quite a large number of guests coming for a few days from all over the world. And we never ever experience any problem or any kind of violation which would go beyond not the regulated, but the human or the moral limits. So, and indeed, they are bringing us money. And that money is very important to us because what we are getting for retirement, it is being supplemented with this amount. And we, the elderly, we need that. So I'm expecting your support in the name of the elderly as well, because that is something important to support our children, our grandchildren, and other members of the family. With all the rest, my previous speakers told already, and I'm thanking you for your consideration.
Thank you. Andrea D. to be followed by Joe G.
Well, this is my third time at the podium. Good evening. My name is Andrea, and I'm a rent-controlled tenant, and I have been on the lease in my building for 22 years, during the time when my mother was in the apartment. I signed a new lease after she passed away, which was the main reason that I moved here. I moved here with my 2 children. At that time, there was an increase of 25% on the rent. I've now lived there 8 years with my children, who I enrolled in school here. My daughter is now 19. She's attending Santa Monica College. She graduated from Fairfax High School. And my son is 14 and has just started high school at Hollywood High. Both attend school. I'm sorry, I'm going off my script here. After several roommates they couldn't pay their share of the rent, I resorted to Airbnb with my landlord's permission. I discovered a whole new experience of quality people who have stayed with me from all over the world, a princess from Italy, and recently a World Cup soccer player. I rent my master bedroom with in-suite bathroom, and I provide parking for the rare guest that rents a car. Many guests come for different reasons, from business to visiting family to relocation. I spend 20 to 30 minutes getting them situated and understand where we are and where our local businesses and restaurants and places that they can go, and I'm available to them by text at any time that they might need me. I tell them about our museums and shopping. I really love this job. I didn't think it was like a job, but compared to having a roommate, that was a job. To have very strange, unusual people move and threaten me and my children, if they'd move in at all. I've had many great experiences which have offered a lot to my children from people from different countries and cultures. I wouldn't be able to maintain my longtime residence without being a full-time host. This is an essential portion of my income. I honestly have no idea how I would have been able to provide for my children over this time without this opportunity. As others have said, the 90-day cap is kind of arbitrary. I thought about a lot of different things about the taxes. If you have questions, ask LA. They are, it's already taken care of in the package. I don't even have to look at it. I don't have to worry about it. If I charge $70 a night or $75 a night, that's all taken care of. Now, most of the time I have long-term guests that are staying 30, 40 days, 2 months, which is preferable for me. But even so, it's all taken care of. And so I know that you're going to get your money. And it makes it a lot easier for me. I mean, as it is, I'm 1099 to death. You have no idea. It's like $1,000 in 1099s a year, because I prefer to be self-employed and be available to my children full-time all the time. When my daughter gets on a bus and gets stuck on Fairfax and Pico at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and she gets on the bus with a creepy person, I say, hang on, I will be at the Grove when you get off that bus. You don't have to worry. Anyway, thank you very much, and thank you for taking your time.
Thank you. I did have one question for you, though, before you depart. You do live in West Hollywood, and you are renting your West Hollywood apartment, but Airbnb takes the taxes
No,
for
no,
LA?
I just do my homework.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I love to research.
Okay.
I want to know everything.
Great.
So I know that this has been something that's worked very well for LA.
Great, I just wanted to clarify that part, because you're paying the
$40
wrong
million,
city.
a
Thank
very
you.
nice too.
No, okay, one an item.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Could you state your name? Thank you.
I'm Joe Greck. I've lived in West Hollywood for 34 years, before it was even a city. I'm 78 years old, a retired school teacher. My pension from 13 years ago is still the same in terms of dollars and cents. And it only pays for about my property taxes and my homeowner's HOA dues, which amount to $7,000 a year, plus another $6,000 for property taxes. And Airbnb has been a godsend for me. You know, what you decide has major implications for people like me who depend on this extra income. I cannot go out to work. It's about the only thing that I can do, and I enjoy it. I have always been, friendly with people, taking them to my home from my travels and stuff like that. Now, we've been told that 90 days is going to be a limit imposed. I just do not understand the reasoning behind this, why we should be limited to the number of days where we rent part of our home to people who want the same, and they cannot afford to go to a hotel. And so I wish, you'd let us know why there is going to be a time limit. With regard to being impacting society in a negative way, because really that's how city council should only be involved in cases like that, I just can't see it. I mean, nobody even knows. I live in a 13-unit condominium. Nobody even knows that I have, Airbnb people coming in. And, if people have guests, they have relatives, I've been doing this for 7 years now, and not once have I had a bad experience with any of my guests. In fact, we've become lifelong friends. We exchange photos and years after. Most of the people who come to my unit are students from overseas. I guess they're attracted by the fact that I was a teacher of history, and many of them, and that's one of my interests. And so we end up sometimes even having dinner together and stuff like that. So I cannot, for the life of me, understand why you would lump us all together with people who have multiple units and are, throwing out their
Thank you.
long-term
Your time has expired. Thank you very much. And our final speaker, unless there are any other people who would like to speak, is Maggie.
Good evening. I wanted to thank you for this opportunity for allowing us to speak. My name is Maggie. I'm a musician and I use Airbnb when I travel. I've stayed at an Airbnb many times in West Hollywood before I actually moved here. And when my family comes to visit me, they stay at an Airbnb. They would not be able to afford staying at a hotel, and my apartment is much too small for my parents and both of my sisters to stay in. My family rented an apartment on Airbnb from a lovely woman who was traveling for work for a week. The apartment was perfect, it was close to me, and it provided my family enough space to feel comfortable. Without Airbnb, my family really just would not be able to visit me as often as they do. The heart and soul of West Hollywood also stems from the creative community. West Hollywood is unlike any other place. It's a hub for people in the music, film, and tech industries, among many other situations. My friends, co-writers, producers from Europe often visit LA very frequently, and West Hollywood is always the place that they want to stay. West Hollywood is vibrant, and I think it's for people involved in the creative arts, it's a place to feel at home. My friends who travel here always rent apartments on Airbnb. They always rent an entire space because they just wouldn't want to be roommates with someone for a week while they're working here for a week. My point here is Airbnb in West Hollywood is so important for the city, and not only to hosts that are present, but to hosts that are traveling and want to lend out their space. I don't think we should limit home sharing to hosts only being present. It's a great source of revenue for the city. It brings customers to local businesses, and I think we should encourage tourism to West Hollywood, and I think it's something that we should all embrace. Thank you.
Thank you. And we don't have any other public comments, correct? All right. Can we start with, do we have any more questions for staff before we go into deliberations? Or I guess we're just making comments, actually. We're not deliberating on passing.
Yeah, Chair Corpus, the question asked about lease, possible lease violations, where existence of lease or no lease. I don't know if you, if staff can answer to those questions tonight or not. I specifically, under the rent stabilization ordinance rules, and there is no need to have a rental agreement in order to establish a valid tenancy. That's what we call. So there are a lot of tenants in the city moved in a long time ago, before Airbnb even was in a discussion, of course, decades ago, and never signed any lease agreement. And clearly there is nothing stipulated in writing. There is no written record what the tenant should do or shouldn't do. So is it anyhow would be clarified already? I didn't see any clarification in the amendment, but is there anything maybe in the ordinance before that was adopted by the city council originally? Was anything about the lease? Well, at the time it was prohibited, but any idea what's the approach could be for not having a signed lease agreement, and if a landlord could exercise the right under state law to evict the tenant for subleasing, but there is no lease agreement, so they cannot use the breach of agreement. So what is the approach?
From the code perspective, which I can really only speak about because I'm not the rent stabilization person, we could write something into the ordinance for the business license provision that says you must follow your lease agreement. I mean, if, to one of the speakers' points, I mean, if your lease says no smoking, no dogs, no this or that, we could write something into the ordinance saying that you must follow those lease provisions. But I don't know if we want code to get involved in, if a tenant does conduct home sharing and one of their guests violates one of those lease provisions, I don't think we want to get involved in that tenant to landlord dispute. I would refer to Gloria here, who might be able to speak to more about those issues where we have no lease, and that's.
Can we clarify a little bit about what, so I think what you're asking is if there's no lease or no restrictions, how does this apply?
How these rules, how these restrictions would apply. If, as one of the speakers mentioned, there is no lease moved in a long time ago, Gloria, maybe Ms. Avalos, you can address. So what could happen in that scenario when a landlord finds out, and let's say the landlord is against the tenant using this program and gives a notice to vacate due to a breach of agreement for illegally renting or subleasing. So what is the RSO position on this type of scenario? What would be?
So based on what they're proposing on grounds for termination, they are referring it back to the zoning code. So it's a zoning code violation because the zoning code is saying you now have to have a home sharing license. So they're in violation of the home sharing zoning code section of the code. The thing is it's very similar to a person doing a home occupation, and it may be a home occupation that requires an administrative permit. And even though their lease doesn't say you can't operate a home occupation, the zoning ordinance allows them to that they can operate a home occupation as long as they follow the zoning requirements. So this is very similar to that. It's not a standalone section of our grounds for termination. It refers back to the zoning code, and that's what's giving them the allowance to do that.
So the zoning code basically would trump the RSO related aspect of it. And
What our grounds for termination is saying, that if you're not obtaining a permit in relation to the zoning code, that could be grounds for terminating your tenancy.
Well, if
That's
the-
what our grounds for termination is saying.
And if the tenant has that, obtained that license or the required, obtained paid the fees, et cetera, and there is no zoning violation.
Correct.
But if the rental agreement states clearly no home sharing, no Airbnb, et cetera, we're saying that the owners cannot evict the tenant.
Right. Our ordinance supersedes that, and similarly to, for example, there are leases that say no pets, but if the pet is an emotional support animal, our ordinance supersedes the lease.
But that's a little bit different situation because we're talking about the federal Fair Housing Act issues here. But this is a local zoning code, could be a different approach. But nevertheless, the landlords could have a right to exercise could have a legal right to evict the tenant by giving a notice taking the case to the unlawful detainer through the unlawful detainer process.
If they are in violation of the zoning code, yes.
And to add to that, the way we have the business license written, the tenant can't engage in this without the approval and telling the city that, no, I've gotten my city or my landlord's approval. So if everybody's operating in accordance, in a perfect world, they're operating according to what the rules say, the landlord will already know about this. And if they say no, well, then the issue's dropped. They're not going to engage in this. If they decide to continue and engage in this without the landlord's express approval, then they're taking their own future, and they're risking their residence.
So I think if this wasn't your question, or if this wasn't part of your question, now I have a question about, so we're talking about most of the leases that people have signed in the last, 10, 15 years, most leases will say you can only have this many number of guest nights per year. They restrict it, so the landlord has total control over who lives in that apartment. In those situations, those old tenancies that may not have a lease at all or were silent on the issue of roommates, it would be extremely difficult for the city to enforce this ordinance or any ordinance dealing with roommates or short-term rentals if the landlord hasn't restricted it themselves, because you're not going to check my finances if they're paying me cash and I want to do it each week. As long as I don't have a restriction from my landlord, I can do it without being evicted. But now you're saying that legally, if this were to pass, the landlord could come to the city and say, I don't want them doing that anymore, bring it to your attention. Then the individual could be sent a warning, the enforcement process could begin.
Well, what we would do is if we're informed that home sharing was being engaged in or the license was obtained without the landlord's permission, that's really the only thing they could really say if the landlord was going to come to us saying they're doing this, but I never gave them approval. Then we can revoke the license. We would issue a notice. We would, saying, hey, you're doing this in violation of the municipal code. We'd revoke the license, but give them an opportunity to present their case to a director. Not sure yet if it'll most likely be the housing director. So that, in that forum, the tenant and the landlord can both present their case. And, if the tenant can present a strong enough case that, listen, I've been doing this, my
20 years, yeah.
Sure, or the property manager, who's a representative of the owner, said I could do this. Well, you've been given de facto permission by the landlord's, agent.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to give them the ability to be heard and to state their case. It's not just once the landlord says no that they're done and then the clock starts and if they keep doing it, they're going to be evicted. We don't want to do that. If once you start the appeals process, that clock's going to have to be put on hold. It has to be. And then once the director's decision has been finalized, then I believe the clock would start at that point in time. So that would then require the tenant to take down all the ads, stop engaging in actual home sharing, or somehow convince the property owner to allow them to move forward.
And what does the city do? You said it was actually a violation of the zoning ordinance. So when somebody's in violation of the zoning ordinance, what does that mean? Let's say I have a landlord that doesn't care, and I have I have whatever the circumstances might be. The landlord's not the one evicting me, or not going to try to evict me, but I am in violation of the city's zoning ordinance. Is that where the fines come in that you spoke
That's
of?
correct.
Okay.
And whoever's actually engaging in that unlawful behavior, in this case generally would be the tenant, is the one that would be facing those penalties.
And then that's what triggers the automatic ability for a landlord to terminate a lease, is the fact that they have violated.
Right, because it's under our illegal use
Correct.
section
Okay.
of
I just
of
wanted to
the
make
rent
sure.
stabilization ordinance.
Right, but that
yes.
30 days has to.
Yeah, you wouldn't
Go
be in
through, right.
violation until you wouldn't even be fined until you violated that 30 days, right? You'd get a warning letter, and then you'd have 30 days to correct it, and
Not
then you'd get.
necessarily. I mean, but generally, yes, we will, under 99% of these circumstances, we will issue a warning letter with no fine. But there are possibilities, and I can't think of necessarily a scenario where this would apply, that we can go straight to citation. It is a possibility. That's why the way we wrote it, it's either a warning or a citation. But I think one of the comments earlier is that we probably need to put some more clarity in that to show that this is for the first time that you've been issued a warning or citation. It's for a first offense, not later on down the road you have other offenses.
Yeah, I'm referring to.
How,
Any other
yeah, I
questions?
have a couple of more questions. How would the owner would learn about the possible zoning violation or the tenant using the short-term rental program? Let's say that the owner is out-of-state owner, or it's a big LLC.
What we are looking to do is, again, as part of the registration process, we're going to make it very clear that you must get the approvals. We've already spoken about that, and the possible penalties if you don't, that you're risking your residence. But we're also going to make it very clear that once you have submitted that information and say, yes, I have met all the requirements of the city, okay. But once you hit enter, we're going to draft a letter to your property owner. It's going to be sent to wherever they get their tax forms, the taxes. And it's going to say, Mr. Property Owner, just an FYI, somebody has applied for a home sharing license at this address. This is the person, we're not sure exactly what it's going to say, but we're going to make them aware.
Okay.
If you have questions, concerns, call us.
Yeah, I like the idea, and I was on one of my recommendations. The appropriate time, I would have suggested send an automatic letter immediately to the property owner and the management company, letting them know that there is a short-term rental license obtained. Now the question about the enforcement of the those that are non-hosted home share. You mentioned there are 3 different categories, right? Vacational rentals, spacing room, and unit, a room or a part, which is that home share, right? That the amendment applies to. The unhosted home share still remains prohibited. Is it correct? Am I understanding correctly?
You are correct.
So there is no license for that situation. Let's say if a tenant rented 10 years ago a rent-stabilized unit, but then kept the unit rented because of the RSO, the rent was low, so the tenant makes more money, moved somewhere else, and now renting out this through the Airbnb. So that would be illegal under the current code, and nothing will change.
Yes, there's no plans that I'm aware of, and no plans on making that change. But that's where the hefty fines, the 400, 600, 800% come into play. And those are the scenarios that we see the $20,000 citations.
Okay. And yeah, I just want to make sure that emphasize that what we call it, the terminology is kind of new to me. Unhosted home share is prohibited so that nobody can basically move out and rent the entire unit. And there is no license to obtain for that type of violation. So now my question would be, I don't want to take attention away from that, but for if I'm touching that particular category, if we have only one person, a code enforcement officer that can go out at the time, at the available time, at the spare time, to do those inspections, and we already have 47 citations given. So I imagine if there were 10 people or 20 people, doing research and inspecting those type of units, I mean, this number would have been skyrocketed. So is the city planning to get a contractor involved? So you mentioned the name of the bureau, Host Compliance Bureau or something?
Correct.
So we're talking about contracting a third party to do that type of work if there would be a change in the current ordinance?
Correct. If you look at what Santa Monica has done, when they started theirs, they believe they hired 4 code officers and other staff that all they do is short-term rentals. The code officer will actually go out, do inspections. You have 2 analysts that all they do is start looking at websites and trying to piece that this person is doing this at this location. I think it ends up costing them like $400,000 a year for this extra staff. We're going to get similar results for less than a quarter of that price because we're looking to automate the process through host compliance. Again, this is what they do. We're going to have some challenges that other cities may not because we have so many multi-unit buildings where it's much easier if it's a single-family home. I mean, it's a lot easier then, but they will be able to help narrow our search area and identify a lot of who these people are, just by comparing social media pictures and links. Because like on Airbnb, one of the options you have is to be able to verify your identity through Facebook. They don't show the outside public, the Facebook page or links, but there are ways of doing it. And host compliance can breach some of the roadblocks that the average person would encounter. They can get past that and help automate a lot of this process for us. So we should be able to, in an ideal world, be able to continue going down this road and do a better job and more effective job of enforcing the truly egregious, ones, with one dedicated officer. And if we need to bring another one in, we're certainly willing to do that, or divert part of another officer's time to this. But really, the goal is we want to get the truly bad actors off the market. The people that are just renting a spare bedroom, like many of the speakers, those aren't our concerns. We're not getting complaints from them. They're not causing a disruption to the community. It's the people that have 3 and 4 units. They're rent stabilized, like you were saying. They rented 10 years ago and they just keep putting it on the market. Well, that's taking full units off the market. We want to get those units back on the long-term market, and host compliance will help us achieve that. And that's really one of our primary driving goals. Is we want to get the truly bad actors, either the multi-unit people that we were just talking about, or the people that are willing to rent to people and have blowouts and 200-person parties, which we did have a couple years ago up on West Knoll. I mean, it was a massive blowout, and it took hours for us to figure out how to get this under control. And it was a big response. And we want to eliminate those people, because those are the ones that are truly disrupting the community.
Okay. And the last thing at this time, Mr. Chair, can we have a dedicated phone hotline, a phone number, once everything is done, where the residents can call and leave a message without even providing their information, kind of anonymous hotline that people can complain that at this address or this unit, we believe there is violation and, violation of the short-term rental ordinance. So then the inspectors can go out and verify that information, because I think there is some fear of retaliation by existing residents and tenants not to contact, and they don't know where to call. Sometimes they call the sheriff's department, and they cannot really take any action.
Right.
So is it possible?
There will be. That's part of the services that Host Compliance is going to offer. It's not only address identification, it's compliance monitoring and compliance verification, tax collection, the permitting system. There'll be the 24/7 staffed phone line, so you're not just going to call and leave a message. You're going to call at 3 in the morning, whenever it might be, and you're going to hear from somebody.
Oh, that's great.
And then they will contact us or send the requisite information to us. So it's a pretty comprehensive service that they're providing for very minimal costs. But yes, we're trying to identify those and try to make it as easy as possible for all parties involved.
All right, thank you.
Any other commissioners at this?
Just a couple of things. Obviously, as rent stabilization commissioners, should be concerned primarily with simply protecting rent stabilized tenants. My first comment is about the 91-day limit. I think that's a judgment call for the city council. As an advocate for tenants, we might argue that as long as the tenant has the permission of the landlord, I wouldn't see any problem with having a significantly longer period than 91 days. But again, I think that's for the city council to make that judgment call. And as far as protecting tenants, the one concern I had was if a landlord has a provision in the lease that says no home sharing, no Airbnb, I don't see in the proposed ordinance here that would somehow, this procedure would somehow preempt the landlord being able to enforce that as a material breach of the lease. The proposed ordinance says that, it won't be considered an illegal use unless a citation or a notice has been given and 30 days notice has been given to cure the problem. But it seems to me that the landlord could go straight to try to evict someone for the material breach of the lease, because it's a material breach of the lease, not because it's an illegal use. Am I misunderstanding that, or?
I think I can answer part of it, and I would have to refer to Gloria on part of it. And I just drew a blank on what I was about to say, and I'm sorry. So can I refer to Gloria and I'll?
Yeah, so there are times where terms of the lease are incomplete. It's against what our ordinance says, and one of the examples would be for late fees. Our ordinance says that you can only charge 1% the rent for a late fee, and we've seen leases that indicate a $50 late fee or a $150 late fee. And what I'm trying to say is if our ordinance says 1% the lease, then it's 1% the lease. If our ordinance says that home sharing is a legal use under the zoning ordinance and the landlord has to provide permission, then they can do it. But if the lease says no home sharing, no subleasing, then obviously in the lease itself, the landlord is already saying, I'm not going to permit this.
So is it a material? So is it a material breach of the lease, and the landlord can give a 3-day notice immediately, or do they have to go through this procedure before they can give a 3-day notice?
That would probably be something that I would, contact our staff attorneys about and see how that would play out in court, where they go straightforward to a 3-day notice, and if it's not cured within that 3-day period, then they would go to court on an eviction. Or would it be something that the tenant had to have received a warning or a notice from code compliance for that to be applicable? So I'll definitely, rely on them to get back to us on it.
So to the extent you're just taking comments and concerns from us, please take it back to staff and perhaps look at, because obviously, our sense is that, my sense is that I don't want to see rent-controlled tenants evicted for engaging in this home sharing until they've been given notice and an opportunity to cure, whether or not it would constitute a material breach of a lease.
Right.
So you might consider trying to strengthen the ordinance in that regard to make sure that a tenant is not going to get immediately served with a 3-day notice and evicted for having engaged in some form of home sharing.
I'm sorry, I kind of remember what I was going to say. I just drew a blank on you. So sorry.
It'll come to you.
I'll come back.
Come
I'll
back
try
later.
to remember what I was going to say.
That's it for me.
Chair Corpus, this is the time we ask questions, right? It's not the commission deliberation yet. Okay.
We're doing deliberation?
We can do deliberations as well, but get
Are
your
we
questions out
deliberating
first.
tonight?
Get your well, we're just providing comments like you just did.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts whenever.
Yeah, I had some thoughts, but
Okay.
Commissioner Marjorie, you can go ahead first.
My own notes say, permits cost money. Everyone's making money. It seems to me that it's often about conduct, of people, and how do you control people's conduct? You hope that any guest that comes into your environment is going to respect your home and your rules. I do worry about units that are not on the rental roll, and I would like to see units back, rent stabilization units back on the rental roll and being controlled. Personally, I am for home sharing in family houses, individual houses. I believe condo owners should be able to have that right too. However, I think they have to deal with the HOA, and there, of course, they could make their own decisions based on the particular issues that are confronted. However, in rent stabilization units, I do fear that it can lead to eviction. And also, I'm concerned about the overburdening of all the rules for the host. There could be just too many requirements that one needs to be on top of. Those are just some of my thoughts.
I have a couple questions. Sorry, a couple questions. So, on page 13, the draft ordinance that we're looking at, this is an ordinance specific to, so the portion, what I'm trying to figure out is separate the portions from the zoning and business licensing to the rent stabilization ordinance. So the actual change in the rent stabilization ordinance, is that on page 16, or can you point that out for me?
Yes, it is on page 16.
And that's in
starts under 17.52.010.
Great. And so that's where we specifically list, very similar to the other example you gave about what isn't allowed for eviction, or what you cannot be evicted for. This lists, you can be evicted for illegal use, but now we're changing it so that we clarify that home businesses and home sharing are not an illegal use unless these certain circumstances occur.
That's correct.
So above that, on the same page on 16, it must be section 5.66060, 070, violations and penalties. So when they refer to the director, the department director, that's the community development director? Or what director is that under 3B? The determination may be appealed to the department director whose decision is final.
Right. For that particular provision, that would most likely go to the public works director.
Okay. They oversee business licensing.
Because he oversees code, who oversees the business licensing. But I do believe that we are looking to add an additional line underneath subsection 4, the next line, basically saying that if the fraudulent information is provided, that must be appealed. That will probably still be worded as the department director, but it will most likely be referred to rent stabilization, the housing director. And that will cover those scenarios where a landlord says, I didn't give you permission, but the tenant says, well, I have permission from either, if a landlord tries to revoke permission they previously gave or got permission from a representative of the property owner. So that will probably have to be decided by the housing director.
Yes, that was kind of my question, is to separate that. So the Rent Stabilization Commission would have no control over the licensing of it, or any questions to deal with the license, except now it sounds like that the housing manager may play a role in determining whether there was fraud in the certification or the certifying that the landlord okayed it. And under normal administrative procedure, how then would someone appeal the housing manager's position? Would that go to court? Or
I would assume, because we haven't written that yet, that it would be written something similar to 3B, where the determination is appealed, or basically the director's decision is final.
so there's no appealing to city council or rent stabilization. It would then, if you didn't like it, you'd go into the court system.
We haven't really spoken about that with the staff attorney or the city attorney, but those things will be questioned.
What was the basis for the 90 days? I know you said that you've gotten a lot of comments on various things. One of the things I think our role is to do is to provide council with some recommendations and some feedback on this. And so I'm curious as to how the 90 days came up.
Can I ask a question about that, though? There was a lot of public comment about those kinds of things. And it seems to me like the only issue that's on the agenda in front of us is the actual proposed amendment. And it seems like the 90 days might be outside of the scope of that. And if it's not, if this is within, our sort of purview to discuss tonight, I just would like a clarification on that.
I would say we can read what is within our jurisdiction. It is the amendment to section 1752.010 grounds for termination. If there's no objection, since we're not taking an action on any of this, we're just providing feedback. If there's no objection from the commissioners, I would say if we have comments about what's in front of us, go ahead and comment. But if there's an objection to that, then we can decide how we want to proceed.
I have no objection to that.
No objection.
No
Do you want
objection.
to?
I mean, I would prefer if we stuck to the, the sort of the amendment or whatever that's proposed. But if it's...
Is your understanding of the amendment proposed, that's very, very limited, unless, okay. I want to make sure we're on the same page in terms of what that would mean. Okay.
I have no objection to a broader discussion. This is a fairly large conversation that we're having, and I don't think there's any harm in our discussing it and those comments being included in the staff report going to council. I don't want to just specifically only to that one particular section.
We could try to limit ourselves till 9 o'clock if that was a concern. That would keep us on track a little bit, I think.
And I'd like
Part of my concern is that because it was stated as sort of the, as this issue, and that's what was advertised or, posted as part of the agenda, it seems, I don't know, maybe it's not an issue, but I don't know if we can be sure that, people who want to comment about the more general Airbnb regulations would not have come to speak on them.
Yeah, I don't think that, I hear you completely. I don't think it precludes them, though, from still providing their comments, because this is a sort of public forum for us to provide council comments, not actual actions that we're changing any policies. So whatever we say has no bearing on them.
Well, but it is, our comments are based on what we heard tonight. That's it's fine.
Oh, no, you're right.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up to that, I mean, Dan has been to 3 commissions now, and they're not just making comments on their specific section, they're making comments on the broader conversation and feedback on, they're looking at the big picture of this, and that's really what he's here for. We want you to see the big picture, not just what's, related to the rent stabilization ordinance.
Mr. Chair, I've been concerned why we've not had legal counsel here to guide us through some of the complications of this ordinance. I think.
We're not making any decisions tonight, we're just
No, but I
providing
still
feedback.
think, it reflects on our discussion, and I think that type of guidance is, I think, important in this type of discussion.
I agree with both of you that legal counsel's advice is always helpful, and we never know when we're going to need it. So my opinion is that it would be great to always have legal counsel here. However, that's not my call, but I also agree, I'm not concerned tonight, really, because we are not taking any action. But yes, it would be helpful.
Well, I think our action will be to receive and file, right?
We're providing feedback, but yes, we're providing feedback, and there is no action that we're taking. But we can, if you're done with your comments, then we'll make sure that everybody's done, then we can close it out, and we'll. Is that what you're saying?
I want to make some
additional
comments.
Also, the time limit, I think, is imperative. Because we could really go very far here, and I'm not sure. I think we should have a time limit.
So, Commissioner Buckles, do you have any more that you'd like to add, knowing that the rest of us are going to talk about the bigger picture?
Yeah, I mean, I have comments specific to the actual amendment that is proposed. It seemed like we did get to the point of identifying or defining a valid license as requiring permission from a landlord. But I think a couple of the comments that were provided from David Warren, who was not able to be here tonight, they go a little bit further than that, and kind of wondering what would happen in certain situations. And so, the first comment is, would it be safer for host tenants in the long term if the city insisted on a signed landlord permission slip up front? Probably, and it seems like to me, although the sort of procedure that you suggested where a notification is sent to the landlord seems to at least indicate that there'd be sort of communication between all of the parties that are involved here. But then what happens if a landlord withdraws their permission? It seems like there are a couple of things that could happen here. A landlord could withdraw permission and tell the tenant that they don't have permission anymore, and then it's incumbent upon the tenant to remove their listing and, I don't know, potentially notify the city that their license is no longer valid. Or should the tenant notify the city, but then the landlord notify the city, and then the landlord would also need to, presumably show proof that he or she notified the tenant, because if not, then I feel like you could get into a situation where a landlord is trying to constructively evict someone for violation of the terms of the ordinance. So it just seems to me like there needs to be and I think you're not done writing the regulations or whatever, but as far as that process goes, it needs to be a little bit more developed, and just a few more clarifications about who needs to notify whom, who's responsible for all of that, to make sure that, all parties are constantly communicating about what's happening, with respect to their right to do this.
If it's okay, I can actually respond to yours, and it actually goes back to the part that I'd forgotten earlier. Throughout this, I mean, education, at least from my perspective and Code's perspective, education is everything, or a big part of the process of writing ordinances and enacting them. We're going to do substantial outreach to tenants, to property owners, to everybody involved, as along every step of the way. And we will make it explicitly clear that, and make every suggestion possible that to the applicants that you really need to get this permission in writing. You really should, for your own protection, just so you don't encounter that scenario where I never gave him the permission. Well, really, Mr. Property Owner, I have your signature right here. I have your email right here. Because if I'm not mistaken, I'd have to refer to Gloria here, that once you have that permission in writing, you've effectively changed the terms of the lease. So you can't just say yes and then say no. So we're going to be encouraging everybody to get something on paper from your landlord or the person that's in charge saying this is okay. It behooves you to do it. If a property owner is unwilling to provide that written permission, or if the applicant is willing to move forward with either a falsified document or no permission whatsoever, that's kind of on them. But we will be doing everything we can to make sure that they are very clear on what they should be doing to protect themselves. Hope that helps.
Why would we put the tenant in that situation? I mean, why I don't understand why we would knowingly give that opportunity when why don't we just put in the ordinance that we have to be proactive and the landlord has to submit a form saying that they agree? Or they're allowing it.
Again, that was kind of going off of the past practices of other cities and what we've learned through the extensive outreach to other cities. San Francisco is really just the shining example. They used to require all this documentation up front. You have to prove everything. You have to get a notarized document from your property owner. Or you have to submit this paperwork. I mean, it was a lot of steps to go through, and all it did was just drive people away. They just chose, well, I haven't been caught yet, so I'm just going to continue going down this path, and I'll keep doing it until I get caught.
Right.
That's really not what we want to do. We want to bring, the people who are willing to operate according to the spirit and really the letter of what this law is saying. We want to bring them into the light. We want to bring them from out of the shadows. And that's why we want to make it as easy as possible. And because everything is going to be done online, it's not something that they're going to hand me a stack of paperwork that I'm going to review or that my staff's going to review. They're going to upload all the requisite documentation, and if we have a reason where we need to question anything that they have submitted, then we can always have access to that. But we do really want to make this as streamlined and easy as possible to encourage more participation.
Any comments?
The home sharing platforms, the Airbnbs, VRBOs, the other companies, they are nothing short of the commercialization of residential properties. And I am a little concerned when I hear from staff and from public, they're not going to go away. And that undoubtedly is true, but I am uncomfortable with for-profit companies trying to force their policies upon a municipality. I was encouraged when a company representative came tonight and seemed to be willing to work with us. I find that encouraging. So that being said, I have far less concern about what's before us tonight, where it's a part-time hosted share at all times rather than wholesale units being taken off the market out of that. So I'm going to refer to some pages in our packet, beginning on page 14, section 5.66.010, reside. Reside shall mean is present in the location for at least 4 hours within every 24-hour period. And then piggybacking on that, under operating requirements, 5.66.050, the requirement that the licensee shall reside in the dwelling unit during the entirety of the guest stay. 4 hours is not present enough. I think if we are doing hosted housing, that the person who has that apartment needs to be there, at least enough to sleep there at night. And most of us sleep more than 4 hours. So I would encourage staff to perhaps look at extending that 4 hour to a longer time.
That was a subject of quite a bit of debate between myself and the city attorney's office, trying to figure out how we accommodate everything, all the possible concerns, because there's a lot going on here. Initially, we initially weren't looking at defining the word reside, but the more we're looking at it, no, we need to be able to establish something. So it was suggested maybe you have to sleep there at night. Well, that takes away people that work at night and, or carry 2 jobs or, do whatever. We're just trying to establish a minimum baseline.
I think that'd be something that council could look at perhaps at that
Absolutely.
hour. So,
Absolutely, but I'll definitely make that note and something that we will continue that conversation for, moving forward.
page 14, home sharing prohibited, 5.66.020, section 2. Home sharing shall not take place in any residential dwelling unit where the property owner or landlord has not given their express approval to do so. I would encourage staff to include a definition of express. We've had a lot of discussion tonight about whether a verbal authorization is enough, or an email, or a form, so I would encourage that perhaps we need to have a better explanation of what that word express means. Also on page 14, application contents, 5.66.030(1A). The address listed on the California identification shall match the address of where the home sharing shall take place. I think some of you know I also volunteer at the Sheriff's Department, and one of our jobs to issue same-day parking permits. And our experience has been that the DMV does not issue a new driver's license or an ID card because of an address change. They do not. They might give you a little sticker, but they will not issue that new card. So at least in our instance, we require that photo ID to say, yes, Dan, you're Dan, and then a current utility bill or a credit card statement. But I think to require that their state-issued ID have that address is going to be really difficult to obtain unless you can get the DMV to change their policy. And good luck with that. Page 15, 5.66050, section 2. West Hollywood residential or guest on-site parking passes shall not be used by, provided to any home sharing guests. This one's going to be difficult to enforce, but I would ask that staff consider that if there is a violation where you find that a home sharing host has issued same-day passes or some kind of parking pass, that particular tenant's right to receive any other parking permit except for their own vehicle, the sticker, that right would be revoked. They can have a pass for their own car, but if they have disregarded the rules, they don't get to have guest parking passes. Page 15, record keeping and tax remittance, 5.66060. I would ask that staff consider that all of the hosts be required to provide evidence of the 1099 forms they're going to issue when they file their taxes. If we are bringing this business out into the open and making it legal, it's taxable income.
Right, that will be part of the TOT registration process. That's something that
part and parcel, sort of?
I'm sorry?
Is that part and parcel, sort of?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for finance, but it's
Okay.
a lot of documentation that you have to submit for this.
Thank you. Violations and penalties, page 16, 5.66070. If fraudulent information is found to have been provided on the business license application, the business license shall be immediately revoked and the applicant should be prevented from applying for a similar business license for a period of 6 months. Just my thought is that the revocation would go before the Business License Commission, and then because they are a quasi-judicial body, and much the same here, where when we render a decision on an appeal, if either party disagrees with our decision, it then goes to the Los Angeles Superior Court. So perhaps consider, rather than being a director's decision on that, it might be business license and then LA Superior Court.
Sure. I think the reason why we were initially saying director is because it's a much faster process to get in front of especially the Public Works Director, versus having to agendize a public meeting, which takes time. I think it was a process of making it an expedient process. But I'll absolutely, if we don't want the department director's, decision to be final, then we can very clearly say that decision is appealable to.
And we're discussing fraud, so I don't think there's any concern on my part about having an agendized item as opposed to kind of pushing it through faster. Page 17, grounds for termination, 17.52.010, comma, little I. Home sharing as defined in Chapter 5.66.010 shall not be considered subleasing, nor shall any home sharing guest obtain a right obtain any rights under the city's rent stabilization ordinance. I'm just expressing my concern. Call it what you will, but I think this is just my opinion. This is going to end up in the courts, where someone is going to consider that a sublease, and there's going to be a determination. That's just a comment. In addition, could we, at city staff, when an apartment gets a new tenant, there is a form, the re-registration upon new tenancy, could we add a box on that form? Because the landlord signs that form, the tenant signs that form, a box saying landlord allows or landlord does not allow home sharing. It wouldn't affect all current leases, but all new leases going forward, we'd have a signed document on file at City Hall. So I'd like to ask that we consider adding that to that particular form.
I like that idea, but you might also want a third option for like case-by-case basis, so that a landlord doesn't have to decide right then and there if they're
Okay,
gonna.
sure. Again, this is, we keep going back to the permission from the landlords, and I discussed it at a prayer meeting, and city council seemed to think it was onerous to ask a tenant to have a form signed in advance. I don't find that onerous. I think if we had a form on the city's website that we could download, print it out, I as the tenant sign it, Josh as the landlord signs it, scan it, send it into the city, but I don't think it's onerous to ask for written record of that prior to the home sharing beginning. And then I'm just going to pass this down. 1 second. My fellow commissioners. This is a standard lease from the Apartment Owners Association of Los Angeles. I think it's pretty standard language in the state of California, as well as the addendum for the city of West Hollywood. But on, I don't know what page it is, item 5, named renter, assignment, subletting. The premises shall not be occupied by more than the maximum number set out in section J, unless by law, nor by any person other than the occupants set out in section K without the advance written consent of the owner and the additional rent set out in section L, so on and so forth. I'm just, again, I think this is going to end up before the courts. This is a really standard lease that spells out who can be in that, and I'm just, it's my concern that there's going to be legal issues down the road where a landlord might bring that up. And lastly, I think that landlords should have the right to opt back out. If they agree to allow a tenant to home share and then find they don't like this activity in their building, they don't want the extra wear and tear, whatever issues. State of California, employment is at will. You can be fired just because your boss wants to fire you. You might get sued over it, but it's at will. And I think this should also be at will. If the landlord changes their mind and says, I no longer wish to allow my tenants to participate in this program, there should be a mechanism for them to be able to do that. Not like tomorrow, you have to kick out who's staying there tomorrow, but a mechanism where they can notify the tenant and the city, I am withdrawing my consent, you may no longer do this. I think that should be the right of the landlord.
Is that fair?
Yes.
I mean, think you work it out with your landlord, you find a place that the landlord's going to let you do this. This is your way to make money. You're living your life. This is the way you're making your money and you're making your income. And then all of a sudden the landlord decides they don't want you to do this anymore and you've done nothing wrong. I mean,
it's the
that affects your
commercialization of a residential property. And if the landlord suddenly says it's too much wear and tear having people in and out, or I've had problems with your guests are too noisy.
Problems are different. I mean,
Yep.
I'm talking about just, you're saying the landlord would have no reason other than to revoke their.
It is the landlord's, as a landlord, I own my property.
I'm not
So
disagreeing with
tenants
that.
have certain set rights, particularly in West Hollywood, very strong rights as a tenant, but ultimately it is the owner of the building. And if they say this has not worked out for whatever reason, they should have the ability to opt back out. They should not be forced to continue.
I agree.
Just my statement.
Mr. Chair, I would just add that rent stabilization jurisprudence basically would say that permission to allow home sharing is a housing service. So once permission is granted after the initiation of the tenancy, to take it away would be a substantial reduction of a housing service.
It would be very substantial.
Yeah.
That's it.
Commissioner Gary?
Oh, I would only echo earlier statements of my commissioners. My concern is the same as the first, which is I do think that that first violation provision could be codified some way into the language here. Just, I think it's important to put that first violation provision in there somewhere, just because I didn't see it in any of the codes. I'm in favor of moving forward with regulating this activity. I think it's happening. I think the cat's out of the bag, and I think as rent stabilization commissioners, we have to protect our rent stabilized tenants from being evicted from this activity that's happening, and this does that. So,
just a couple of thoughts, and I want to share my position on this amendment and the ordinance, the initial ordinance. Where I fully supported the initial ordinance that prohibits any type of short-term rental in, specifically in the rent stabilized units. I know that number of great speakers we had tonight expressed their own experiences and thoughts and ideas, and we have wonderful also comment from the public member David Warren, which I read carefully, and I see the concerns. So as a rent stabilization commissioner, my first concern is that are we doing enough to protect the rent stabilized units in the city? We have around 16,000 of these priceless units, and that's my primary responsibility and the job. Public speakers, when they come here before us, sometimes most of them, I would say, don't even aware about the rent stabilization ordinance or what type of protections the ordinance provides to the tenants in the city. So this was the first ordinance that the city passed in 1984, and that shows how important this ordinance was for the city council members at the time and for the public at the time who incorporated the city. From LA County to create this jurisdiction, so we will have protections for the residents. So now, by adopting this prohibition on short-term rentals, it was a strong message that we're not going to give away the rent-stabilized units in the city. And as staff described, that there are three categories. I have a problem with all of them. So my position hasn't changed since the initiation of the ordinance. I believe that the ordinance shall remain intact, so we should not change anything, we should not amend anything. I believe that we will not be able to regulate to the point that we can provide we can ensure that none of the violations may occur, and then will not be any loss of the direct or indirect loss of the rent stabilized unit at one point. My other concerns relate to, which we haven't discussed here. I know I heard some of the public comments that all the visitors, they were great people, and I'm pretty sure you had wonderful experiences. My own personal experience was a completely different one. We cannot guarantee a safety and security of our neighborhoods and the buildings if we would allow this program to happen. I can briefly share my own experience when I live in a rent-controlled, rent-stabilized unit, an old building, and where the tenant who rented a vacant unit, we noticed that the tenant would be there for a couple of days in a week, and then people would arrive and leave, come and go. So the tenant who rented this two-bedroom unit established sort of a presence, but she would just rent out through our web pages. So small building, a lot of noise, a lot of nuisance. People who came and go, they came in the middle of the night with the luggage, they invited guests, they were drinking, smoking in the common area. They created so much nuisance, everybody complained. So the owner, we have a great landlord, we have a great management who immediately acted, and that tenant is no longer in that unit. So again, speaking about share
what's the call? I'm still getting used to the home share program. So that person, bringing that scenario, that person actually established a presence. So technically, she was sharing the unit, but it's not true. That's what she was doing. She was running a small motel from that apartment. So, and everybody had concerns. And we are not talking about these things here. Safety, who comes in to these buildings? Who checks whether these people are not, in violation of some criminal, activity somewhere elsewhere? They come from everywhere, and there is no way of checking that. In the middle of the night, as I said, they bring drugs, they bring anything. There could be criminals there, so we wouldn't have even know that there's someone, a sex offender or a criminal person who lives next door to mine. Don't forget this old rent-stabilized units. There are buildings that have some code violations. They have very poor sound isolation, and that creates a lot of nuisance for people who, just like me, not considering using this program and would never do that. So because of this, I am completely against of it, and I like the new term that you used, Vice Chair, commercialization of the residential units. I would say residential rent-stabilized units. And that's why I'm not going to, in any shape or form, support this, amendment, and I will express my position at the other meetings if it's needed. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just make a couple of my own points, and hopefully we'll be done. So I know this isn't exactly what we're talking about, but to me, if you own your home or you own your unit that you live in, and that's your primary residence, I don't care what you do with it. I mean, I don't care in terms of if you rent it for 10 nights, 50 nights, 100 nights. If that's your primary residence, then I don't care what you do with it if you own it. What I'm concerned about is for the landlords who, I think that the tenant needs to be proactive in getting their landlord's approval, especially since most of the leases that are signed in the city all say no sublease, or no subleasing. I mean, I think that in a strict rent control city like this, that I completely support the rent control law or the rent stabilization ordinance that we have. I think when we can, in a situation like this, we should think of the landlords and remember that we're kind of imposing this on them as well as we're doing this as a city. If we do allow for rent or tenants, whether they're rent control or not, if we do allow for tenants to do this, like I said, I think we need to have the express written support of the landlord. I think either we need to make it very clear to the landlord that we will consider this a housing service in the future, or we need to specifically state in the ordinance that this is excluded for all units, that this is not to be considered as a housing service, so that we don't have to deal with the issue of it being taken away from somebody. Otherwise, I don't think it should be taken away. It should be considered as a housing service, and good luck with us trying to figure out what that's worth. I kind of mentioned the 90 days. To me, as long as the unit is occupied, as long as the city has some sort of strict enforcement, whatever you guys come up with, that you can verify that the person in charge of that unit actually lives there. I don't care if they're gone for a week or gone for 3 weeks, but if that's their primary residence, again, I don't care how many nights of the year. It should probably be limited. I think we get to maybe half a year, 6 months, they can rent out their time. Otherwise, they just need to get a roommate and help with the housing crisis versus just visitors coming into town. Those are really my only concerns. There was just a question I had, I think no one brought it up, but why does the city require clean and laundered bedding and towels shall be provided to home sharing guests upon commencement of their stay? I mean, why would we care about that.
Those are more in line with what the state health and safety codes are. We want to make sure that people that are being invited to come into our city and stay even for a short time period are not living in squalor. I mean, they're not being exposed to bed bugs, et cetera. I mean, we want to have basic life safety and health provisions there. This should not be onerous to Mr. Host, just wash the sheets. I mean, it really, it's not, in my opinion, a very onerous thing. And that's really kind of what we want to do.
And then my last thing was, if we do proceed with specifically rent-stabilized units and allowing those tenants to work out some agreement with their landlord and however that works out, I think that at the end of the day, if the city proceeds with that, or proceeds with allowing for rent-stabilized unit tenants to do this, that a certain percentage either goes directly to the landlord, that I think is probably the best and easiest way to handle it, or goes into a fund for that building, a trust or something, so that that money can be used. We obviously wouldn't require the landlord to use it for any certain purpose, but at least we, as a city, making money off of this as well, are giving back to that building and the maintenance of that building. Because that's what we always hear about rent control is, oh, we can't afford to maintain our building. So those would be my comments, is if there was some sort of small percentage that could go back in those rent-stabilized units.
Would you consider, that we're paying TOT, would there could be a different definition of the TOT paid to the city within a portion of that? Would that be, if it's whatever percent?
It doesn't matter to me what
we couldn't do anything with the TOTs because that has to go to a certain fund, wherever that
Just
is.
a thought.
If you wanted to I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
I mean, I would say you guys figure that out. It doesn't matter to me how it's listed or what, but I think a certain small percentage should be dedicated back to either the landlord's pocket, if they choose, or if the landlord is silent on the issue, it should still go back to them in some way or some sort of trust that can be used for that property. That'd be my recommendation. Any other comments? All right, I think we are done on this item. Is that helpful, or did that set you back?
Yeah, I'm just, for the narrative, as we move forward to city council, I'd like to get kind of an idea of, how many commissioners, are, it seems like 90 days, the whole 90-day limit was a big talking point, and part of it was, so I'd like to see if we can get some idea of how many commissioners are in support of keeping it 90 or raising it to 90, or if there's a max or if there's a minimum, whatever it might be.
Can you answer the earlier question that was posed then?
As far as where it came from?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to answer that. That actually came in my July 17th narrative, or the conversation with council. That was part of the direction, was to come back with an ordinance that allows for home sharing. And then in the council discussion, it was kind of settled, let's just cap it at 90 days. Okay, that's what we're returning with.
So, David, sure.
I was just going to say, I actually did sort of opine in my comments about it. I don't really have a problem with it, but as a nod to Commissioner Buckle's comment earlier, I am actually not sure it's really up to the commission to opine on that. That really is an issue, I think, for the city council.
Right.
I think we really should probably limit our comments to what was agendized, which was the no-fault eviction provision.
And I'm comfortable with that. It's just, I know like the planning commission, they all kind of took a straw poll. Hey, this is how we feel. And that's fine. We're going to include that in the narrative. But the official recommendation or the action taken was, yes, we recommend moving this item forward. But on a side note, this is how we kind of feel.
We were a bit indifferent, right, about the 90 days. Is that kind of, I mean, I know some people spoke stronger than others about it, but was anyone set on 90, 89, 150, 300?
And if it's not an issue that any of you guys are really that worried about, and you just want to leave it up to council, I'm comfortable with that as well. I'm perfectly okay with that.
I just don't see the relevance in setting a date or setting a number that low anyway. But
I'd like to leave that to council.
Well, it's all left up to council, there's no question.
Yeah.
This is left up to council, but they're asking for our opinions, and if they're not, he is. So
I'll give an
my
opinion on it, a quick one. I see this as an end run, or I see if we uncap it, I see it as an end run around the rent stabilization ordinance. I see if there's no cap, then what's the point of having a rent stabilization ordinance if a landlord can take a market, if somebody in a unit or an owner of a unit can take a unit off the market and rent it, with an unconditional amount of time, sure. And I see it as using the rent stables ordinance as a sword for a rent stabilized tenant to kind of use it in their favor and keep a depressed rent and, not take on a landlord and take a room or a bedroom off the market to, make an income for themselves. And obviously this, rent stabilization ordinance was to protect long-term tenants of West Hollywood, not to allow them to profit on it. That would be my quick opinion on why I do think there should be a cap.
If I could just ask a quick question, hopefully it won't prolong this discussion any longer than it has to, and I apologize. Would the commission be in support of doing something to address some of the concerns of capping the amount of money that can be made on rent-stabilized units used for home sharing? I mean, that is a possibility. San Francisco has something similar to that. I don't know, but we just want to get as thorough of a conversation out of the way as
to defer to
possible.
city council.
I mean, I already mentioned the one thing that I felt about the income, no matter what it is, I don't care what the income is. But.
Yeah, I would be more concerned with capping the days because it's turning it into a hotel, really, is what it's doing. So capping the days, I don't care if they charge $25 a night or $2,500 a night. That's what the market bears. But my concern is the commercialization of residential properties.
That's fair. I appreciate the feedback.
Anything else?
My needs are met.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for that report and answering all of our questions and the random questions that we may have all had. So we will move on to our next item, which is if I'm looking at it correctly, if I'm looking at the right one, the liaison appointments. So has it been 1 year, 2 years since we've had two? Yeah, 2 years since we've kind of discussed our liaisons. And so let's, two of you that I think are listed here.
I want to mention, I forgot
liaisons.
to let Laura know there's one that was left off the list. I know they meet very infrequently, but I've been a liaison also to the East Side Working Group.
Thank you, all of you who came out to speak this evening.
Are we going to have a discussion on this?
I was going to actually allow the two of you first, but let's have Laura answer that question. But I was going to allow the two of you, since you are listed as liaisons, what it's like to serve.
Could you leave us your card, please? Would you leave us some cards?
Do I have a card with me? No, I do not.
Will you, Laura, can you bring them next time? His cards, so we could have his direct number? Thank you.
Thank you.
You asked about another appointment on here? Or?
It's just the East Side Working Group, which meets very infrequently, but I was the liaison.
Are they still?
I think they.
I think they finished.
Yeah.
I think they finished. I think their report is
done?
up on the. Oh,
No, this
is the new one. He's
the
on
newer one.
The task force.
I haven't heard that they've been dissolved, but they meet, if they're still meeting, it's very infrequently.
Yeah, they presented their report. I thought they were done, but
Could
okay.
be.
So whoever gets appointed to that, know that it might not be in existence. Yeah. So Rob and Richard, do you want to talk about your roles this last year, or the last 2 years as liaisons?
Actually,
It's your annual report, wouldn't you? No, I'm just kidding.
was it meant to be an annual
No.
report? Well, I think the position of liaison from a commission to other commissions is very important. I think it becomes the face of the commission. And that's why I have supported in the past, and it's always been that way other than the last 2 years, that one individual is the liaison. I think it's more effective.
What does the liaison do or report back, or that's my real question.
Basically,
What are people signing up for?
what are they signing up for? When you go before any commission, you basically are giving a report on the work of your own commission and how it's affecting the community. Remember, the comments are specifically from what has come from rent stabilization. So, it's not a matter of having your own personal opinion. You report on how rent stabilization affects everyone's life here in West Hollywood, specifically renters, and keeping people aware of what some of the regulations and ordinances are all about, and to be knowledgeable, because often there's questions and you want to be able to answer those questions. And again, I think one individual should be the representative from this commission.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything to that, Richard?
I would
Richard?
agree in part and
Rob?
disagree in part. My role as liaison to the commissions has been, I've gone to introduce myself, and then I watch their agendas. I get them online, and if there's an agenda item that I think also crosses over to rent stabilization, those are the meetings that I attend. Other than that, I've never felt the need to attend every single commission meeting to report on this. It's only when there's been an issue. An example for planning, while they really have nothing to do with rent-stabilized units, I've always thanked them for their continued work for when the buildings are approved, that either it's paid into an affordable housing trust or that they have affordable units maintained on site so that we maintain a mix of residents. But that's been my role as liaison.
Do you guys just want to go down each one, Arts and Cultural Affairs? If you're interested, we'll write your name down, and then we'll go through the entire list, and then we'll go back. If there are duplicates on any of them, then we'll figure out some kind of switching around and who wants to do what. None of us are required to do this. I know that there's different time commitments that everyone has. Doesn't look like the meetings, sorry, I didn't even think about it till just now, but it doesn't look like the meeting times are posted here. But if you're interested, maybe you might know. So
and
is
the
anyone
commissioners
interested?
shouldn't feel like we need to have a liaison for every commission, so don't feel like you have to volunteer because nobody else is.
Like, I will likely not be volunteering because I just can't make it to these meetings.
I'd like to, if agreeable, stay on human services, planning, and if there is an East Side working group.
You're going out of order, but okay, Rob, planning, and human services.
Rob, would you have a problem with just representing the commission at any of the commissions you see fit to attend?
Well, let's go through interests first. So Arts and Cultural Affairs, anyone interested in serving as the liaison?
I'll state right now that I'm not interested in any liaison position. I've done it long enough, and I don't care to do it right now.
Business license, historic preservation. Rob, you mentioned human services. Anyone else interested in human services? Planning, Rob, you mentioned you were interested. Anyone else interested in attending planning? Public yeah, Rob is human services and planning, and then we'll go back through again just to confirm everything, but public facilities, anyone? Public safety? Transportation? Disabilities? Lesbian and Gay Advisory Board? Russian? Senior? Transgender? And women's.
All right, let me answer Richard's question. While I was volunteering to serve in those two commissions, if the chair and or staff could make me aware if there is an agenda item on another board or commission that kind of ties into rent stabilization, the others, I would be happy to go, but I'm not going to volunteer to go to every single board and commission. But if there's an agenda item that pertains to us, I'd be happy to go to any other boards and commissions.
I'm a former member of Business Licensing Commission. I'd be happy to be the liaison to that commission, for instance. I have some, contacts and friends there.
Okay.
I'd be happy to volunteer for one, provided that, again, it's not a.
Yeah, no, this is just as you can and as things come up. Do you have a preference on?
I don't.
Let's see. Lesbian and gay meets the same night as us, I believe, right? Or is it women's? Oh, it's both, I think, women's and lesbian and gay. They meet on one Thursday, and the other one meets on the other Thursday.
Human
So,
Services, I
so
thought.
those are difficult for us to attend.
Yeah, and I know transportation meets Wednesday, and I'd be happy to visit that. I intended to visit at some point regardless. I don't know how it would relate to rent stabilization at all, but if I'm going to go.
When is public safety?
Yes.
When?
I'm looking at the calendar. I don't. Okay.
I could probably do that.
Okay.
Might I add that whether there's any relevance with what our work is with other commissioners, we should be there to educate them. And to inform them whether transportation is affected or not. I think all the commissioners should know what rent stabilization is all about, since it's the most important ordinance in our city. And even though it may not affect them, they have been informed and they could pass that information on. So I think all commissions and advisory boards are equal based on this.
Yes, they're all equally important. I think the comment I made last time we went through this was that I feel I'm an ambassador to the city and to the Rent Stabilization Board wherever I go and however I present myself here in the city. And although I don't speak on behalf of the commission, I represent the commission, and I make sure that I don't do anything that's going to, I always try to educate people about what our commission's doing and not give anybody the impression that, you know, I'm doing something bad on the commission or the commission's not working for them. So that's why I don't sign up for a single one, because I can't commit to any single one, but anytime I would go anywhere, I kind of wear a couple different hats, and I always try to be the best ambassador I can for the city as a whole and specifically this commission.
Chair Corpus, for the records, I cannot commit for the same reason because of my work schedule, and also commute from my work to West Hollywood is really bad. I barely make to our meetings, so that's the only reason why I cannot commit to go to those meetings.
So right now I have Commissioner Charity for the business license, Vice Chair Bergstein for human services and planning, and Commissioner Buckles for public facilities. Did you say, no, public safety, right? Or was it public safety or public safety? And
the rest are left out.
I think you did transportation as well. Yeah, Charity for transportation.
I move approval of that list.
Second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's passed, you're ordained. Okay, one abstention. Any other public comments?
No.
All right, then
I
we will-
did have a question. If you can recall, back at the beginning of the meeting, I was running around during the approval of the agenda. Who motioned and who seconded?
I believe the
for the
motion
agenda?
was, yeah, Commissioner Charity, and the second was,
Commissioner Topsy.
Me.
It'll be on film if you don't remember.
No,
I
it
just
wasn't? Okay.
thought you might remember.
No, I think I moved
I can
the,
be that one.
I moved the minutes.
okay, we think it was Richard then.
Okay. Oh, then I'll just double check the video. Yeah.
I think I originally moved the agenda, but it got interrupted.
Correct.
Right.
So, but
Yeah,
it was
we did the back and-
re-moved and seconded
Because you
later
did the
on, so.
minutes. Remember, we jumped ahead and, okay. She'll figure it out, I guess.
That's okay. I'll verify.
I'll
Thank
abstain
you.
on the next one.
Thank you.
So am I to understand?
Commission comments?
That the commissions that have been left out then will have no representation, right? There's no liaison to the commissions that have not been chosen.
There's no official liaison
No
for whatever
official
that
liaison.
means, yeah. Commissioner comments?
I have one. I just wanted to talk about it. At our last meeting, we were discussing an item that would have more of an impact on property owners than tenants, and a commissioner made the comment that we need to strengthen our existing rent stabilization ordinances. And while I firmly am in favor of that, I want to make that the word fair didn't come into that conversation. And I think if there was an existing rent stabilization ordinance that some might consider not fair to a tenant, that conversation might have gone a different way. So I just want to say that I'm in favor of enforcing, strengthening our existing ordinances, but they need to be fair to all sides.
Any other comments? I think that's it. All right. Staff, do you have any additional comments this evening? Nope. Were you out? All right. Then with no other comments, then we will adjourn to the next regular meeting of the Rent Stabilization Commission, which will be October 26th here at the West Hollywood Park Meeting Room.